My boyfriend called me ugly in front of his friends and dumped me at a restaurant, leaving me to pay for the dinner, but my truth blaze torched his lies and crowned my comeback. As he walked away, he loudly said, "A girl like you should be grateful I even dated you." I smiled and calmly waited. This morning, my phone blew up with 13 missed calls. You guys, I'm still processing what happened last weekend. Like, I keep replaying it in my head and wondering if I somehow imagined the whole thing. But nope, my maxed out credit card and the ice cream stains on my couch confirm it was very real. For context, I had been with Jake Reynolds for 2 years. Not some casual fling or whatever. We had the whole routine down: Netflix marathons on Sundays, awkward holiday dinners with both families. Even that weird couples yoga class he insisted on trying, which we both sucked at, TBH. Things weren't perfect between us, are they ever? But I thought we were solid, like we had talked about maybe moving in together this summer. He had these little annoying habits, leaving his socks literally everywhere, texting during movies, and making these helpful comments about my appearance. Stuff like, "That shirt makes your arms look bigger," or, "Have you thought about trying a different hairstyle?" I always brushed it off as him being honest. God, past me was such an idiot. So last Friday, Jake texted me about this dinner with some work friends. He's never really included me in his work life before, always saying it wasn't professional or whatever. So I was actually excited. I even went shopping for a new outfit, rip my budget, and spent forever getting ready. I'm talking full YouTube makeup tutorial, the fancy straightener I only use for special occasions, the works. I get to this super expensive restaurant downtown, the kind with tiny portions and no prices on the menu. Red flag number 1. Jake's already there with 2 guys he works with, Marcus and Lucas. The moment I walk up, there's this weird vibe. Jake barely acknowledges me, just this half stand from his chair and a quick, "You're late." I was literally 2 minutes late because parking was impossible. I sit down, and he looks at my outfit and goes, "Oh, you wore that?" Not quietly either. His friends exchange this look, and I immediately feel my face getting hot. For the record, I was wearing a dark blue dress that I thought looked nice, nothing crazy or inappropriate. I try to laugh it off, like, is there a dress code I missed? But he just shrugs and says they already ordered appetizers, cool. The next hour is basically Jake talking about work stuff I don't understand while his friends nod along. Whenever I try to join the conversation, Jake either talks over me or explains why I'm wrong about whatever I just said. At one point, I mentioned something about a customer at my store, and Jake interrupts with, "She doesn't really get how things work in the real business world." With this dismissive wave, like retail isn't a real job. I've been a manager for 3 years. I'm sitting there, getting more uncomfortable, wondering if Jake's always been this condescending. And I just never noticed, or if he's showing off for his friends. Either way, not a great look. Then Marcus asks how we met, and I start telling the story about how his coworker Sophie Hayes, my best friend, introduced us. Jake cuts me off mid-sentence and says, "Yeah, Sophie felt bad for her, I was doing her a favor, really," then laughs. You guys, my stomach literally dropped. That's not even close to how it happened. Sophie had actually warned me about Jake's ego before setting us up, but said he was a good guy underneath it all. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. I excuse myself to the bathroom, mostly so I don't cry in front of them. I'm in the stall, texting Sophie like, "WTF is happening?" When I get a notification that Jake just tagged himself at this restaurant on Instagram with "Boys Night Out." Like I'm not even there. Sophie calls me immediately, but I sent her to voicemail because I don't want the guys to hear me crying. I splash some water on my face, fix my makeup, and give myself this sad little pep talk in the mirror about getting through dinner with dignity. When I get back to the table, they're all laughing about something but stop abruptly when I sit down. Awesome. The waiter brings our main courses, and Jake keeps making these jokes about my food choice. I ordered pasta, one of the less expensive options, because I was already worried about the bill. And he keeps saying stuff like, carb loading for a marathon? And, that's a bold choice for someone with your body type. Each comment feels like a little paper cut, and they're adding up fast. At this point, I'm barely eating, just pushing food around my plate and counting the minutes until I can leave. Then Lucas asks Jake about some presentation, and Jake launches into this whole story. About how his boss loved his ideas and he's basically running the whole project now. Something clicks in my brain. The week before, Jake had been stressing about the same presentation, saying his portion was only 5 minutes and he was nervous. Now, suddenly, he's the star? It's like he's living in some alternate universe where he's the main character. Then the bill comes, the waiter sets it on the table, and Jake picks it up, looks at it for a second, then slides it over to me. I think he's just showing me the total, but then he says, and I will never forget this. You know what, I don't think this is working. I stare at him, waiting for the punchline. There isn't one. I've been trying to make this work, but I'm just not attracted to you anymore. I think we should break up. In the middle of a restaurant, in front of his friends, after 2 years together, who does that? I'm completely blindsided. Are you serious right now? This is how you want to do this? He stands up, grabs his jacket, and says, I still get a knot in my stomach thinking about it. A girl like you should be grateful I even dated you this long. You're not exactly a prize. Then he and his friends just left. They all walked out together, laughing, leaving me sitting there with a $347 bill for all their stupid Wagyu appetizers and fancy cocktails. The waiter came over with this look of pity that made everything 1,000 times worse. I paid the bill with my credit card, which I'm still paying off from Christmas, yay. And somehow made it to my car without completely falling apart. I called Sophie from the parking lot, sobbing so hard she couldn't understand me at first. She came straight to my apartment with a pint of Ben & Jerry's and a bottle of wine, the real MVP. Between ugly crying and stress-eating cookie dough, I told her everything. She was livid, like, I had to talk her out of driving to Jake's place and causing a scene. That's when she got weird. She kept asking questions about what Jake had said about work, the project he mentioned, his role in the company. Finally, she was like, Elise, I don't know how to tell you this, but Jake isn't who he says he is at work. Turns out, Jake isn't some hotshot marketing guy about to get promoted. He's an assistant who makes coffee runs and schedules meetings. All those business trips, complete fabrications. The big presentation? He was just doing the slides for the actual team. The fancy title on his LinkedIn? Total fiction. I felt like such an idiot. For 2 years, this guy had been lying about basically everything, and I never questioned it. What else had he been lying about? That night, after Sophie left, I went into full detective mode. I scrolled back through our text history, our photos, everything. So many inconsistencies I'd missed. Comments about money that didn't add up. Times he had to work late, but his location showed him across town. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that moment in the restaurant, how small he made me feel, how humiliated I was. At like 3 a.m., I get a text from a number I don't recognize. Hey, it's Ethan Carter from Jake's office. Sophie gave me your number. There's some stuff you should know. That's when things got really interesting. First update. First, thank you all so much for the supportive comments on my last post. I literally cried reading some of them, in a good way. A lot of you asked for an update, so here's what happened next in this absolutely wild situation. So, after finding out from Ethan, who works with Jake, that my boyfriend of 2 years had basically been living in a fantasy world of his own creation, I spent the next few days in that gross post-breakup fog. You know the one, where you're alternating between crying into a pint of ice cream and angrily scrolling through old photos, wondering if any of it was real. My apartment looked like a disaster zone. Dishes piled up, laundry everywhere, and approximately 7 empty DoorDash bags. Because cooking felt impossible. The worst part was that I kept having these moments where I'd think of something funny to text Jake, then remember what happened, and it was like being dumped all over again. My brain was literally stuck in a loop of, did that actually happen? and how did I not see this coming? I'd also been avoiding social media because I just knew Jake would post something annoying. But Wednesday morning, I finally caved and checked Instagram. Sure enough, there was Jake, with a gym selfie captioned, "Level up, know your worth." The audacity, I nearly threw my phone across the room. Sophie came over that evening with takeout and found me wrapped in my comforter like a sad burrito. She's been amazing through this whole thing, making sure I eat actual food. Listening to me rant about the same things over and over, and not once saying, "I told you so." Even though she had her suspicions about Jake from the beginning. While we were eating, Sophie showed me her texts with Ethan. Apparently, they'd been talking a lot, and he had tea to spill. According to Ethan, Jake had been telling everyone at work that he dumped me because I was clingy and always talking about marriage. What? I was not the one who made a Pinterest board called Future Home Ideas. Yes, Jake actually had one of these, which he claimed was research for some work project. Then Ethan dropped the real bombshell. Jake wasn't just lying about his job title, he was currently on probation for taking credit for other people's work. And might actually get fired soon. All those late nights working. He was frantically trying to fix mistakes before anyone noticed. Those business trips. Complete fiction. I was still processing all this when my phone rang. It was Carol Morgan, Jake's mom. I almost didn't answer, awkward, but figured I should be an adult about this. Carol has always been super sweet to me, like, remembers my birthday and actually asks questions about my life, kind of sweet. She sounded concerned and asked if everything was okay between me and Jake. Apparently, he told his family we had a little fight, but everything was fine. A little fight? The man publicly humiliated me, dumped me in front of his friends, and stuck me with a massive bill. I tried to keep it vague, saying we were taking some space, because I didn't want to put her in the middle. Then she mentioned Jake's birthday dinner on Saturday and how the whole family was looking forward to seeing me there. You guys, I nearly choked on my lo mein. Jake had told his family we were still together and that I was coming to his birthday dinner. The dinner was at his parents' house, and apparently, he told them we had big news to share. After hanging up, I sat there in shock while Sophie looked at me like I'd grown a second head. She was like, is he delusional or just a pathological liar? Honestly, I was wondering the same thing. That's when we came up with the plan. I wasn't going to just ghost his family, they'd always been kind to me, and they deserved to know what kind of person Jake really was. But I also wasn't going to cause a scene or be vindictive. I would simply attend the dinner, as invited, and let the truth come out naturally. The next day, Ethan met me for coffee, slightly awkward since we'd only met through Jake, but he turned out to be really chill. He confirmed everything and added even more details about Jake's work lies. The team Jake claimed to lead was actually just him and 2 interns. The big presentation he was in charge of last month? He was just operating the slideshow while his boss presented. Ethan seemed genuinely upset on my behalf, saying he'd always thought Jake's stories about me seemed off. Apparently, Jake would come to work complaining that I was high maintenance. When in reality, I was paying for most of our dates toward the end because Jake claimed to be between paychecks. Which I now realized probably meant he was terrible with money. Midway through our conversation, Ethan got a text from their boss, asking if he could come in Saturday evening to help with some emergency project. Ethan was bummed because he'd had plans, but then I had an idea. What if Ethan needed to drop something off at Jake's parents' house during the birthday dinner? The timing would be perfect. As we were figuring out the details, my phone buzzed with a text from Jake. First one since the restaurant disaster. It just said, "We need to talk about what happened, I might have overreacted." Might have? I showed Ethan, and he nearly spit out his coffee. Overreacted is when you get annoyed about someone being late. Not when you publicly humiliate your girlfriend of 2 years and stick her with a $300 bill. I didn't respond, let him sweat. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. I wasn't going to this dinner unprepared. I dug through old texts, finding all the lies dates when he claimed to be at work, conferences that didn't exist. Stories about coworkers that Ethan confirmed were fabricated. Even photos Jake had posted of himself at work events that were actually just downloaded from the company website. Friday night, Sophie came over to help me pick an outfit. Not gonna lie, part of me wanted to show up looking amazing just to spite him. But we decided the best approach was to look nice but not like I was trying too hard. We settled on a simple black dress that Jake once said made me look average. Which now I realize was his weird negging attempt, because I got compliments whenever I wore it. I barely slept Friday night. What if this backfired? What if his family took his side? What if I froze up and couldn't go through with it? By Saturday morning, I had chewed my nails down to nothing and gone through about 17 different scenarios in my head. Around noon, Jake texted again. Looking forward to seeing you tonight, wear something nice, my parents are excited. I didn't respond to that either, let him think whatever he wanted. I spent the afternoon getting ready with a weird mix of dread and anticipation. Sophie helped me with my hair and gave me a pep talk when I started to lose my nerve. At 5:30, I got in my car and headed to his parents' house. I had to pull over once because my hands were shaking too much to drive safely. I sat there for a minute, doing those breathing exercises from that meditation app I downloaded months ago but never actually used. What was I doing? Was this crazy? Maybe I should just block Jake on everything and move on with my life like a normal person. But then I thought about him sitting there at his birthday dinner. Probably telling everyone some fake version of our relationship, maybe even making himself the victim somehow. And my resolve hardened. I pulled up to his parents' house at 6:15, fashionably late, which I knew would annoy Jake. There were several cars already in the driveway, looked like the whole family was there. I checked my makeup in the rearview mirror, took one last deep breath, and walked to the door. Jake's dad, Thomas Morgan, opened it with a big smile and a hug, ushering me inside. The house smelled like Carol's famous pot roast, and for a second, I felt a pang of sadness. I genuinely liked Jake's family, and this would probably be the last time I'd see them. I rounded the corner into the living room, and there was Jake, drink in hand, mid-laugh at something his cousin said. He froze when he saw me, clearly not expecting me to actually show up, despite what he told his family. The look on his face was, well, priceless, TBH. For a split second, panic flashed across his features before he composed himself and came over with this fake smile. He gave me a stiff hug and whispered, "You actually came, we need to talk privately." I just smiled and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I wouldn't miss your birthday for anything. Especially since you've been telling everyone we have big news to share." The color drained from his face. Carol clapped her hands excitedly and asked if this was what she thought it was. Jake's sister, Megan, gave me a knowing look. Thomas started joking about finally getting grandkids. Jake gripped my elbow a little too tight and tried to steer me toward the hallway. But his mom called out that dinner was ready, and everyone needed to sit down. As we all took our seats around the dining table, with Jake nervously watching my every move. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan, "On my way, 15 minutes out." Jake leaned over and hissed, "What are you doing here?" I thought after the restaurant. I just smiled sweetly and said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, I wouldn't miss the chance to tell your family about what happened at that restaurant, Jake. I'm sure they'd love to hear that story." The look of absolute panic on his face as his mom started bringing out the food, worth every second of anxiety it took to get there. Game on. Second update. I'm finally ready to share what happened at Jake's birthday dinner. Sorry for the delay, I needed a mental health day after all this drama. Plus, my Wi-Fi has been acting up because my neighbor borrowed my password and apparently downloaded the entire internet. Where did we leave off? Right, me sitting at the dinner table with Jake's family while he panicked about what I might say. So there I was, surrounded by Jake's family, his parents, Carol and Thomas, his sister Megan, his grandma Dorothy, and two cousins whose names I always mix up. The table was loaded with Carol's famous pot roast, those buttery mashed potatoes I've literally dreamed about. And a fancy salad that nobody was going to eat but everyone would pretend to appreciate. The first 20 minutes were straight up awkward. Jake kept trying to control the conversation while shooting me these warning glances. I just smiled and passed the bread rolls, enjoying the way his left eye twitched every time I opened my mouth. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. Carol kept the conversation flowing. Bless her, she asked about my family, my job, the usual small talk. When she mentioned how proud they all were of Jake's big promotion, I nearly choked on my water. I glanced at Jake, whose face had gone the exact shade of the beets on the table. Jake jumped in, talking about how his team was crushing their targets. And how his boss was practically grooming him for senior management. I just nodded along, watching him dig himself deeper with each word. Thomas, who's always been the quiet type, suddenly asked Jake about the Johnson account. Apparently, Jake had been telling his dad about some huge deal he was supposedly leading. Jake's answer was so vague, it could have been a horoscope. Something about strategic pivots and leveraging core competencies that literally meant nothing. His sister Megan caught my eye across the table. She's always been the skeptical one in the family, the type to Google facts during arguments and call people out on their BS. She raised an eyebrow at me, like, is he for real right now? That's when Carol brought up the future. She asked us about our big news and whether it had anything to do with us taking the next step. Jake nearly dropped his fork and mumbled something about it not being the right time to discuss it. His grandma Dorothy, who has zero filter and is my absolute favorite person in his family, cuts in with, so, are you two moving in together or what? Because Jake said you were looking at apartments together. Again, news to me, the furthest we'd gotten in that conversation was me once saying maybe we should think about combining our Netflix accounts to save money. Jake tried steering the conversation back to himself, talking about how his boss had given him a company card for business expenses. I couldn't help myself. I asked, what kind of expenses are you authorized to approve? He stammered something about client dinners and team outings. That's when I casually mentioned, oh, speaking of dinners, Jake took me to this amazing restaurant last week. What was it called again, honey? The one where you met up with Marcus and Lucas. The color drained from his face faster than my phone battery on TikTok. Seriously, my phone can't handle more than 20 minutes of scrolling before dying. Anyone else? Before he could respond, the doorbell rang, perfect timing. Carol went to answer it, and I heard her delighted, oh, Ethan, what a surprise. Jake looked like he might actually pass out. Ethan walked in with a folder, all professional in his button-up shirt. He apologized for interrupting the birthday dinner but said he had some work documents Jake needed to sign urgently for Monday morning. Carol, being the perfect host, immediately invited him to join us for cake later. Jake tried to usher Ethan toward the front door, but Thomas insisted they could handle work stuff right there at the table. Since we're all family here. Ethan sat down in the empty chair beside me, which I'd strategically saved, NGL. Jake was gripping his fork so hard, I thought it might bend. That's when Thomas asked Ethan how the big presentation went, the one Jake had apparently been leading. Ethan looked confused for a second before catching on. He glanced at me, then at Jake, and I could see him making a decision. Ethan said the presentation went well but clarified that their boss had delivered it, with Jake and the team providing support. Thomas looked confused and said, that wasn't how Jake described it. I jumped in, because I'm messy like that, and asked Ethan about Jake's promotion. Poor Ethan looked so uncomfortable, caught between loyalty to a coworker and not wanting to lie to an entire family. He fidgeted with his napkin and said something vague about company restructuring. Jake interrupted with this fake laugh and tried changing the subject to sports or whatever. But his sister wasn't having it. She asked Ethan point blank what Jake's current title was. The silence that followed was like that moment when you drop something in a public bathroom. Everyone hears it, no one wants to acknowledge it. Ethan looked at Jake, who was silently pleading with his eyes, then at me. I nodded slightly. He cleared his throat and said that Jake was an administrative assistant in the marketing department. The silence. Thomas put down his fork slowly. His grandma made this little HMPH sound. Megan muttered something that sounded suspiciously like, "I knew it." Jake immediately went into damage control mode, saying Ethan was confused, that he had multiple roles, that it was complicated. But the dam had broken. His family started asking specific questions that he couldn't weasel out of. When did you get promoted? He hadn't. Why did you say you had a team? He didn't. What about that corner office you mentioned? Also fictional. With each question, Jake's stories unraveled more. He kept looking at me, like this was somehow my fault, which made me more determined to let everything come out. Carol, bless her heart, tried to smooth things over. She suggested we all have some cake and talk about happier things. As she went to the kitchen to get it, Megan asked me directly about the restaurant I'd mentioned earlier. This was my moment. I took a deep breath and told them everything. How Jake had invited me to meet his friends, how he'd belittled me throughout dinner, how he dumped me in front of everyone and walked out, leaving me with a $347 bill I could barely afford. Jake tried interrupting several times, but his dad shut him down with this look I'd never seen before, pure disappointment. Jake's defense? That I was exaggerating and playing victim. That I had embarrassed him in front of his colleagues by not fitting in. That leaving me with the bill was teaching me financial responsibility. His grandma actually snorted at that last one. Ethan, who had been quiet through most of this, finally spoke up. He confirmed my story, adding that he'd heard Jake bragging to coworkers about how he'd put me in my place. He even pulled out his phone and showed texts from Lucas, receipts, y'all, discussing what had happened. Carol came back in with the cake just as Jake was trying to paint himself as the victim. She set it down and asked what she'd missed. No one spoke for a moment, then Thomas said, very quietly, that they needed to have a family discussion about honesty. Jake exploded, like, full-on temper tantrum. He accused me of turning his family against him, called Ethan a traitor, and said everyone was just jealous of his success. What success? He knocked over his water glass, pointed at me, and yelled that a girl like me should be grateful he even bothered with me. His mom gasped. His grandma said something that I'm pretty sure was old people swearing. His sister just shook her head, like she wasn't even surprised. I stayed calm, somehow, and said that the only thing I was grateful for was finally seeing who he really was. Jake stormed out, slamming the door so hard that one of Carol's decorative plates fell off the wall and cracked. The aftermath was weirdly peaceful. Carol apologized to me like 50 times. Thomas looked tired and sad. Megan helped clean up the spilled water. Ethan apologized for his part in the awkwardness but said he couldn't stand by while Jake lied to everyone. Then the strangest thing happened. Instead of asking me to leave, they insisted I stay for cake. We all sat there, Jake's ex-girlfriend, his coworker, and his family, eating birthday cake without the birthday boy. In any other situation, it would have been the most awkward thing ever, but somehow, it wasn't. After cake, I helped Carol clean up in the kitchen. She kept apologizing and saying she had no idea Jake had been lying about so much. She seemed genuinely heartbroken, not just about what he'd done to me, but about who her son had become. I felt bad for her. TBH, no parent wants to realize their kid is, well, kind of terrible. She asked me quietly if there had been signs before. And I admitted that, looking back, there were red flags I'd ignored because I wanted to believe the best about him. When I was getting ready to leave, Thomas pulled me aside. He thanked me for my honesty and apologized for what his son had done. He seemed so defeated, like he was trying to figure out where they'd gone wrong in raising him. I assured him it wasn't their fault. Jake had made his own choices. Ethan offered to walk me to my car, probably sensing I needed a moment to process everything. As we walked down the driveway, he mentioned that Jake had been having problems at work for months. taking credit for other people's ideas, lying about his contributions, even faking emails from clients. He was actually on his final warning before potential termination. Suddenly, Jake's desperate need to appear successful made a twisted kind of sense. His whole identity was built on this fake image of success and status. When I thought about it that way, I almost felt sorry for him, almost. I thanked Ethan for backing me up and drove home in a weird state of emotional exhaustion mixed with relief. Like when you finally take off an uncomfortable bra at the end of the day. Sorry for the weird analogy, but y'all know what I mean. When I got home, I had 3 missed calls from Sophie, wanting updates. I was about to call her back when my phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "You've ruined everything, this isn't over." I didn't respond, just blocked his number and made myself some tea. I should have been scared or upset, but honestly, I just felt tired. And maybe a little proud of myself for standing up to him. I thought that was the end of it, I really did. But this morning, my phone blew up with 13 missed calls from Jake's mom, his sister, Ethan, and several numbers I didn't recognize. Something had happened overnight, and based on the increasingly frantic voicemails, Jake had completely lost it. Last update. I'm finally ready to explain about those 13 missed calls. Thanks for being patient while I processed everything that happened. Also, sorry for the delay, my laptop decided to do a surprise 4-hour update right when I sat down to write this. So, where were we? I woke up Sunday morning after the birthday dinner disaster to find my phone blowing up with calls from Jake's family and Ethan. At first, I legit thought someone had died or something. My stomach did that awful dropping thing as I scrolled through the notifications. 5 missed calls from Carol, 3 from Megan, 2 from Ethan, and 3 from numbers I didn't recognize. I called Carol back first because she seemed the most worried, based on her voicemails. Which were just variations of, "Elise, please call me as soon as you can." She picked up on the first ring, sounding exhausted. Apparently, after Jake stormed out of the birthday dinner, he'd gone on a complete bender. He'd shown up at his ex-girlfriend's apartment at like 2 a.m., drunk and ranting about how I'd ruined his life. The ex, who I didn't even know existed, TBH, was understandably freaked out and called Megan, who had to go pick him up. But that wasn't all. Jake had also spent the night sending unhinged messages to practically everyone we knew. He texted Ethan, threatening to ruin him at work. Lol, good luck with that when you're about to get fired. He'd posted this long, rambling status on Facebook about how he was surrounded by snakes. And people would regret betraying him. Most concerning was that he'd posted my address in a private message to his friend Lucas, saying he was going to make me pay for humiliating him. Lucas, who apparently has some moral compass, immediately called Carol and forwarded the message. Which is why she was trying so desperately to reach me. I was sitting on my couch in my ratty old pajamas, hair still in yesterday's messy bun, trying to process all this information while Carol apologized approximately 50 times for her son's behavior. I should have been scared, I guess, but honestly, I just felt tired. Like when your phone is stuck at 1% battery for hours, just waiting for it to finally die so you can charge it and move on. Carol insisted on coming over, just to make sure I was okay, which was super sweet but also made me panic clean my apartment. Nothing motivates tidying up like knowing someone's mom is about to see your living space, am I right? I was literally throwing dirty laundry into my closet and scrubbing dried toothpaste off the bathroom sink when my doorbell rang. It wasn't just Carol, Megan was with her too. They brought coffee and those little pastries from the bakery near their house. Which, not gonna lie, might be what I miss most about being with Jake. We sat at my tiny kitchen table with the wobbly leg that I've been meaning to fix for months. And they filled me in on the Jake situation. According to Megan, this wasn't the first time Jake had lied about his life. In college, he'd apparently told everyone he was on the baseball team when he'd actually been cut during tryouts. He'd once claimed to be talking to a popular girl who had no idea who he was. There was a whole pattern of him creating this fictional version of himself that was more successful, more popular, more everything. As they were talking, my phone kept buzzing with texts from friends who'd seen Jake's social media meltdown. Sophie was freaking out, wanting to come over with her boyfriend, who does kickboxing, just in case. She watches too many crime shows, I swear. My group chat was blowing up with confused messages about the dramatic subtweets Jake was posting. That's when my doorbell rang again. I literally froze, wondering if it was Jake. Megan peeked through the blinds and let out a long breath. It was Ethan. Apparently, Jake had been blowing up his phone all morning too. And Ethan wanted to warn me in person since Jake had mentioned paying me a visit. So there we all were, me, Jake's mom, his sister, and his coworker, sitting in my living room on a Sunday morning. Trying to figure out what to do about this man-child throwing a tantrum because he got caught in his lies. If it wasn't so stressful, it would have been hilarious. Like, imagine explaining this situation to someone who wasn't there. Ethan mentioned that their boss had already gotten wind of Jake's social media tirade. Someone had screenshotted and forwarded it, so Monday at work was going to be interesting. Megan was worried Jake might do something stupid if he lost his job on top of everything else. That's when my doorbell rang again. This time, it was the building manager, looking super awkward. Apparently, Jake had been downstairs, making a scene in the lobby, demanding to be let up to my apartment. The manager had refused, bless him, and threatened to call the police. At which point Jake had stormed off, but not before yelling that I was a lying expletive, loud enough for the entire first floor to hear. Carol looked devastated. She kept apologizing and saying she didn't know where they went wrong with him. I felt terrible for her. Imagine realizing your adult son is basically a walking red flag. Megan was more practical, suggesting I document everything, just in case Jake's behavior escalated. We were all sitting there, trying to figure out what to do, when my phone buzzed with a notification. Jake had tagged me in an Instagram story. Against my better judgment and everyone in the room telling me not to look, I opened it. It was a photo of me from early in our relationship, sleeping on his couch with my mouth open. Captioned, "Miss Perfect who ruined my birthday isn't so perfect. A girl like you should be grateful anyone took pictures of you at all." Like, that was his big revenge? A slightly unflattering photo from 2 years ago? I actually laughed out loud, which wasn't the reaction Carol was expecting. But honestly, if that was the worst he could do, I was going to be fine. Just as we were discussing next steps, there was a loud pounding on my door. We all jumped, then we heard Jake's voice, slurring slightly, "I know you're in there, open the door." Ethan immediately stood up, like he was going to confront Jake, which was sweet but unnecessary. I was already calling the building security guard, perks of a slightly more expensive apartment building. Jake kept pounding and yelling, and I could hear my neighbor's door open as she came out to see what the commotion was about. By the time security arrived, Jake had moved on to kicking the door. The security guard didn't mess around. He told Jake to leave or he'd call the police. There was some back and forth that I couldn't quite make out, then silence. The guard knocked gently and let me know Jake had left the building but was still in the parking lot, possibly waiting. Carol was mortified. She insisted on going down to deal with her son herself, and honestly, I was happy to let her. She was so upset that Thomas, Jake's dad, had to come pick them both up. The whole situation was just sad. After they left, Ethan and I sat on my couch in stunned silence for a bit. He finally broke it by asking if I had any alcohol, which felt like the appropriate response to the morning we'd had. We split a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, and this definitely counted. By the time Ethan left, it was late afternoon, and I was emotionally exhausted. Sophie came over and stayed the night, just in case Jake decided to make a return appearance. He didn't, thankfully. We ordered pizza, watched bad reality TV, and tried to process the absolute soap opera my life had become. The next few weeks were, well, an adjustment. Jake got fired from his job after failing to show up for 3 days and sending inappropriate emails to several coworkers. He moved back in with his parents temporarily, which I only know because Megan and I have kept in touch. She's actually pretty cool. We get coffee sometimes. Jake tried to contact me a few more times, leaving voicemails that ranged from angry to tearful to weirdly nostalgic. I saved them all, just in case, but never responded. He created a few fake Instagram accounts to message me, but they were so obviously him. Who else would write, "You're making a big mistake," with that spelling error? That I just blocked them instantly. The weirdest part was running into him at Target about a month later. I was in the home section, looking at shower curtains, and suddenly, there he was. Holding a pack of socks and looking like he hadn't slept in days. We made eye contact, and for a second, I thought he might cause a scene. Instead, he just turned around and walked away, leaving his shopping basket right there in the aisle. That was 3 months ago. Now, Jake eventually moved to his uncle's place in another state, according to Carol, who still sends me holiday cards, which is sweet but awkward. His social media has gone suspiciously quiet. Megan thinks his parents finally cut him off financially until he gets therapy. As for me, I'm doing pretty good, actually. My apartment finally feels like mine again, now that I've rearranged the furniture and replaced the stuff that reminded me of Jake. The strangest outcome of all this might be my unexpected friendship with Ethan. We're not dating or anything, though Sophie keeps trying to make that happen. But we grab lunch sometimes and text about stupid TikTok videos. It's nice having someone who witnessed the whole Jake saga and understands why I now have trust issues the size of Texas. Looking back at everything, I'm not angry anymore, well, not just angry. I'm also weirdly grateful, not for dating Jake, definitely not that, but for finding out who he really was before things went further. Imagine if I'd moved in with him or something, shudder.